tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So this surfaced for me a few times in the last few weeks as we were talking about, the higher reaches of the fetters, getting uprooting primal ignorance and deep restlessness and fundamental conceit, the sense of self. And then in our discussion last week, I think, looking at awakening and, this concept of stream entry. And it comes up, of course, whenever we talk about things like remembering past lives and the fundamental insights that grounded the Buddha's framework that he taught. Side note, can you hear piano playing in the background of my thing? No? Brilliant. Zoom filters. My kid is practicing the piano very wildly downstairs, so it's marvelous. It's a marvelous soundtrack that you can't hear. So whenever we talk about the deep mysteries, maybe, at the heart of the Dhamma, there can often be a sense and a question that comes up regularly in discussion of how much of this am I supposed to believe or take on faith, and how much should I just set aside the ideas about where I'm going and just be with my direct experience as it arises. And I think some confusion about this comes particularly for folks like many of us in some convert Buddhist lineages who may have been exposed to the teachings of many different lineages, because there are some lineages like the Zen that I started in many, many years ago in the early 90s, in Rinzai Zen, where they didn't even believe in giving meditation instructions, much less anything about where this was going. It was really just, sit absolutely still and don't look forward out of your experience toward anything, and just investigate in this very moment. And you have systems like, the Soto Zen practice of shikantaza, just sitting and not striving for any particular states. And there are ways that even in systems like the Theravada, that does give very comprehensive meditation instructions, there can be a reticence to talk about the heights of practice, because it's really easy for us to get strivey and get down on ourselves for what we have or mostly haven't attained. And so many teachers shy away from talking about where practice can lead. So, and for other reasons, I think in postmodern Western culture, there's just a general, almost pop psychological intuition away from, telling people about transcendent heights of spiritual attainment and what's possible, and focusing much more on what's imminent and right here, because that is the heart of practice, to be with just this breath, just this sensation, just this moment, and not get lost in thoughts about where this is going or what nibbana is, or But the discourses of the Buddha are full of the Buddha telling people where this thing goes, describing the heights of meditative practice, the immersion states of jhana, and the arupas, the formless states, to people who were far from experiencing those, who hadn't experienced them yet at all, and telling folks in quite some detail where the wisdom unfolding of this practice goes, about the seeing of one's past lives and the seeing of how karma operates for everybody in a predictable way based on actions, on ethics, and that the full and final uprooting of the causes of suffering is possible. The Buddha would teach this to all sorts of people, and in many cases taught them as the lure to bring them into practice. So there's really a discourse that says this is possible. These heights of practice are possible. At the same time, right, and the Buddha would also say, or said very prominently once to a group of practitioners known as the Kalamas of Kesaputta, who were confused about hearing many different teachings from visiting teachers. The Buddha very famously said to the Kalamas, um, don't believe anything on hearsay or because a teacher says it or because it seems right to your logical mind or because other people think it's true. Um, the only thing you should really rely on is the fruit of your own practice. When you know directly that something is true, then you should hold to that. Modern and postmodern convert Buddhists love the Kalama Sutta, that teaching, don't believe anything except out of direct experience, because it supports a very popular kind of libertarian pop psychological approach in the, kind of something that's called Protestant Buddhism, actually. You know, a modernist Buddhism that reflects the biases of a fundamentally Protestant culture, that one should have direct personal individual access to spiritual heights, um, not needing or relying on the intermediaries of priests or monastics, but also not relying on extensive belief systems, faith systems, that you should be able to just be in a direct, mysterious, spiritual contact yourself with what's true. So the Kalama Sutta is very popular for that teaching. But in the Kalama Sutta itself, the Buddha gives that teaching to these people who are confused by the conflicting teachings coming to them. But then he says, don't believe anything just because I say it or anyone says it. Believe what you encounter directly in your own experience. Then practice these things. And he very specifically teaches them the Brahma Viharas. Practice loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity to the point of being able to pervade one's experience of the whole universe with these qualities, right? Infinitely spreading love, and pervade the universe with the perception of love. And so it's beautiful that he both says rely on your own experience, but then he also gives a very precise practice. And he doesn't say you need to start off by believing in the Four Noble Truths or believing in, rebirth or whatever, liberation, nibbana. He says, do this practice, spread the heart of love and compassion to the whole universe. And when you do that, the sense is, then you will know that this direction is true and fruitful. And I think it's beautiful that he gives not primarily a wisdom practice like vipassana, investigate your experience moment to moment until it dissolves into, that's not what he gives. He says, expand the sense of love in your heart till it fills the universe. And so that will give you confidence. The word in Pali that we translate as faith can also be translated as confidence. I like the translation confidence. And the word is saddha. And the Sanskrit parallel is shraddha. And one of the nice reasons to translate it as confidence rather than faith is that for many of us in a Christian or post-Christian or monotheistic adjacent culture, the word faith can come with a lot of baggage, and particularly the baggage that we think it has to be faith in something like God or a particular God or Christ, or faith in a certain kind of an entity that you're directing your confidence toward. In the Buddhist system, faith or confidence most specifically is directed not toward a divine being. There is faith in the Buddha in a particular way that I'll mention in a minute, but um, the Buddha doesn't ask us to be faithful toward, for instance, the gods. There are lots of gods, nature spirits, spirits of formless realms, but they're not objects of devotion for the Buddha. They are beings caught in samsara just like us, who happen to have very privileged lives based on their past karma. You may have been one in the past, you may be one in the future. At the moment, you're human. You may have been an animal of a different kind than a human in the past. You may be an animal again in the future. You may have been a ghost or a being in a very hellish realm in the past or in the future based on your actions. May you not be in the extremely painful realms in the future based on your actions in this life. But believing in all that, or believing that you've been things in your past lives, is not what faith or confidence is directed at. Seeing one's past lives for the Buddha is never taught as an object of faith. You don't have to believe that it's true. It's a practice that, when done successfully, leads to an experience that feels undeniable. And from the outside, we can deconstruct that because we're postmoderns, and we can deconstruct any internal experience as being only subjective and therefore not scientifically reliable. That's true, but within a pragmatic Buddhist framework, it doesn't matter, because when you see something and it has such an impact on your psyche that it uproots ancient habits of distress, and you feel consistently safe from misconduct and free for the rest of your life. Who cares if you were imagining it? That's not the framework the Buddha uses. The Buddha says, meditative states and the wisdom attainments that come from them are true because they work. They're also true because they are repeatable between people. And so one of the mysterious things about, meditative states is that the inner realm is not just a random place where different people have radically different experiences. Given similar instructions, different people actually, across cultures, have interestingly very similar experiences. And this is curious, There are sequences of predictable states that people who do intensive vipassana, for instance, experience, right? Why would it be the case if you name what's arising most prominently in your sensory field, every couple seconds for many, many weeks? Why is it the case that at some point you have a very predictable experience of separating viscerally or somatically from the object of perception and perceiving the awareness mind and the object of awareness as being absolutely separate? And it feels a certain way. Separation. What's up with that? It's such a predictable thing, and it has a name in the system. It's Namarupa, the insight into Namarupa. It's strange that very distinct psychophysical phenomenon arises predictably if you do this kind of practice in a systematic way. And a number of other things, the whole set of 16 things, that's mysterious. But the tradition, I think, has understood through deep experiential and systematic investigation of the results of meditation, has understood what states these practices predictably give rise to. And one of those is the ability to direct your attention to your previous births and get some information from that, see something, experience something that, whatever you call it, however you make a narrative around it, is a distinct, repeatable experience that's been repeated by millions of people over the course of Buddhist history. So that's mysterious. But those things are, in their specifics, like the existence of past lives or the existence of heaven realms, those are not the things that we're asked to be faithful toward or confident in. So the primary framework for confidence or faith in the Buddhist system is confidence in the triple gem. So this is Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, or the teacher, the teachings, and the community of practitioners, of realized practitioners particularly. And so the formula that we chant in the morning puja contains lists of the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And these are traditionally the things that our confidence is directed toward. So the list of the qualities of the Buddha goes like this: Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho. So it starts, he is indeed the pure one, the perfectly enlightened one, the blessed one. So bhagavato, the blessed one; arahato, the perfected one; samma sambuddhasa, the perfectly awakened one. We chant these in the homage as well, right? What does it mean to proclaim or to orient toward understanding the Buddha as the blessed one, as a perfected one, as a fully awakened one? I think in these verses, what we do is we clarify, or we come into relationship with, this traditional narrative about this human, Siddhartha Gautama of the Sakyan clan, 2,600 years ago. And we name this person, Gautama, with these qualities that remind us of the results of the path. So faith in the Buddha is really faith that full awakening is possible, right? Because what does it mean to be a blessed one, to be a perfected one? The word arahant describes the attainment that the Buddha has landed in, that he has fully uprooted suffering, ended the round of rebirth, and attained nibbana, the extinguishing of the fire of suffering. Samma sambuddho, samma is fully, sambuddho is fully awake or self-awakened. And so we are partly saying, I acknowledge this idea that the Buddha is fully awakened, right? I'm willing to relate to the idea of full absolute awakening. And this is fundamental, because if we don't come into relationship with the concept of full, final, total awakening, we are going to, in a sense, hold part of ourselves back. If we think there's no such thing as absolute freedom from suffering, but, sure, it's clear that practice can bring some relief from anxiety and suffering, and I'm down with that. The Buddha would say, don't aim toward a halfway goal. But to aim for the full goal, to be like, yeah, be ambitious, go for full awakening, you have to have the felt sense, the confidence that that's possible. So we begin with that. The Buddha is fully awakened, and I take that on faith, right? I trust the lineage I'm in, right? So itipaso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijja charana sampanno. He is impeccable in conduct and understanding. Sugato, the accomplished one. Lokavidu, the knower of the worlds. Anutaro purisadam masarati. He trains perfectly those who wish to be trained, or unexcelled teacher of those who can be taught. Is another translation of that. Satta deva manu sanang. He is teacher of gods and humans. Buddho bhagava. He is awake and holy. So these are all ways of saying, I'm orienting toward this person who became this extraordinary teacher, demonstrating all these qualities. Teacher of gods and humans, unexcelled teacher of those who can be taught. And so what happens for you when you hear those kinds of words, this list of the qualities of the Buddha? Part of what we can explore is when we hear a list like this that sets the Buddha, maybe so far apart from our direct experience of what's possible in his human life. Even if you look at your teachers, and even the best ones, among them, you won't see necessarily, teacher of gods and humans, you know, impeccable in knowledge, in conduct and understanding, like we try. And, but I'm happy with like on the road to impeccable. Like that's, um, and so it really asks us to do something that some of us, or in some of our cultures, are not comfortable with doing, which is to acknowledge the possibility that a human could become perfected in a certain way. Wow. Like, what do you do with that? And so just hearing the words, I think we're asked to not just to blindly take them on, like, okay, whatever, I'll try to believe that. Or yeah, that's authentic, but even just to wrestle with it, with that core proposal that it's even possible for a human to become like the Buddha. The Buddha is not unique. He is the latest, the most recent in an endless string of Buddhas. The texts list like 26 of them, going back many, many cosmic eons. And um, sometimes those lists sound mythical. They do sound mythical. But the underlying idea is that this is something that can be attained, and that perfection, arahantship, can be attained. So what do you do with that? So then going on, that's the qualities of the Buddha. That's the first framework for how to be confident in the path. Uh, the framework for confidence in the second of the refuges, or the jewels, the Dhamma, the teachings, goes like this. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo. The Dhamma is well taught or well expounded by the Blessed One. Sanditiko, apparent here and now. Akaliko, timeless. Ehipasiko, encouraging investigation. Opanaiko, leading inwards. Pachatangwe Dita Bo Winyuhiti, to be experienced individually by the wise. So confidence in the Dhamma. For many of us, this one's easier than confidence in the Buddha as like this perfected human. I know a lot of folks who are Buddha skeptical, but Dhamma confident, you know. Confidence in the Dhamma, it's for some of us, it's easier to feel confident in a thing that's not a person because people seem so fallible, but we can set the Dhamma on a pedestal as being like, okay, I really like this teaching. And it feels like these words could be true. They lead inward. That's clearly true to me, right? Others of these are harder to hold, like timeless. Again, I'm from a postmodern, very deconstruction oriented, generation and culture that understands every cultural phenomenon, like a body of literature like the Dhamma, to be culturally specific, not universal. I don't know if this is the Dhamma that resonates for aliens on a planet gazillions of miles away, you know, that doesn't resemble ancient India or modern, Earth at all. How do I know if this is actually a Dhamma that resonates with them? But it says, timeless, akaliko, timeless, beyond time. The Dhamma, the praise of the Dhamma proposes that there is something universal and beyond the cultural specifics here. And so that's a thing that we are invited to find confidence in. And that's hard to do, right? To overcome, it's hard for me to do, to overcome um, my natural orientation toward deconstruction at this point, to say, let's not project a kind of universality onto these teachings. Let's remember that they come from a specific time and place, ancient India, these particular people, and therefore they're interpreted differently by us who are not those people. If we are not those people, all of us are not ancient. Some of us are, descendants of South Asians, some of us are not. Receiving this in diaspora, it's an appropriate post-colonial discourse to be skeptical about claims of universality. This is why, the teaching on the perennial philosophy, Aldous Huxley and some of those folks, has really been rejected at this point, and I think skillfully rejected, because when you claim the universal, it makes it easier to intentionally or unintentionally erase difference and therefore erase the the cultural presence in artifacts of knowledge, and particularly if you're part of a dominant cultural group, being drawn to the cultural knowledge of an oppressed cultural group, it's a certain kind of violence to claim that those teachings then are universal. So then we want to come into this relationship with the Dhamma and the claim that it's, universal and timeless, and somehow hold both, maintain your appropriate justice-oriented skepticism of claims of universality while holding a kind of spiritual or mystical understanding that the Dhamma, that something in the Dhamma is speaking beyond the bounds of specific cultures, right? That it's true somehow for all kinds of beings, for devas, for animals, for hell beings, for people in any nation speaking any language, that grasping leads to suffering, right? That's a kind of fundamental in the ecosystem of conscious life, right? That's, I think, what we're asked to take on. And it could be phrased in different ways. The specific, Dhamma in the Pali Canon, protected by the Sri Lankan monastic establishment and coming down to us as the Pali Canon, like that's a cultural product. And I could imagine that looking very different in very different places. But when I'm asked to take on the Dhamma as a point of faith or confidence, I think what I'm asked to take on is the core fundamentals, And the Buddha said as much to his stepmother, Mahapajapati. She was going off to travel in distant lands, and she said, "How will I know what's true Dhamma and what's not?" And he said, any teaching that contains the Eightfold Path, even if it's phrased differently, that's true Dhamma. Any teaching that has real concentration and immersion, even if it's taught or phrased somewhat differently, that's Dhamma, and you can be confident in it. Any teaching that has the ethical principles, the precepts, in a coherent way, even if they're taught a little bit differently, that's the true Dhamma. And so that's a very helpful orientation, to not get stuck on the words, to not land in a fundamentalist relationship to the words that have come to us in a cultural framework, but to find in ourselves confidence in the fundamental structure of the Dhamma as it's come down to us. And of course, the teaching on the Dhamma, the phrases in praise of the Dhamma, contains this summary of what the Buddha taught to the Kalamas, to be seen by the wise for themselves. So, the Dhamma can be seen by you directly, and it is to be seen by you directly. And knowing that, then you can find your faith in it as something that you can trust. The third of the faith gestures are the verses in praise of the Sangha. And they praise particularly the monastic Sangha as an appropriate object of devotion, really. And so the word Sangha means the community of those who have attained the liberation paths, stream entry all the way up to arhatship, plus people who are working toward them. And sometimes it's used specifically to mean the monastic Sangha of monastics of all genders, but the ordained Sangha. And that's primarily what it's pointing to in these verses. It's the monastic Sangha because it talks about them being worthy of gifts. And it's particularly within the monastic Sangha, those who have realized the path. So, Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sango, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Right? So there's an appreciation of the dedication to practice that the Sangha has demonstrated. Ujupatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sango, who have practiced directly. Nyayapatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sango, who have practiced insightfully. So there's let's see, Nyaya Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sango, who have practiced insightfully. Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sango, those who practice with integrity. So this is, you're orienting toward both sincere practice and successful practice here as objects of confidence. Yadidang Chatari Puri Sayuganiyata Puri Sapugala. That is the 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings. Esa Bhagavato Savaka Sango. These are the Blessed One's disciples. The 4 pairs are people practicing toward and having attained each of the 4 liberation paths: stream entry, once return, non-return, and arhatship. Ahuneyo, such ones are worthy of gifts. Pahuneyo, worthy of hospitality. Dakhineyo, worthy of offerings. Anjali Karaniyo, worthy of respect. Anutarang punyaketang loka sati, they give occasion for incomparable goodness to arise in the world. And so here you really get, one should be confident in beings or things that are worthy of that confidence, worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respect. And it's important that, it's the 4 pairs. So it includes people practicing for stream entry. In other words, no particular extraordinary, attainment yet, right? No wisdom yet, not liberated at all yet, but working on it. That's an object of confidence. And it's important in a way that's very different from some other spiritual systems in the Buddhist system, that there's not a formal place in the hierarchy or in the teachings on, respect and faith. There's not a formal place for virtuoso meditators. This is not a system that venerates particular gurus who are very good at meditation or supernormal powers or teaching of various kinds as objects of faith. You should be confident in your teachers, and in monastics, but it doesn't say, but you should be particularly confident in arhants or in non-returners, high-end realized people. The monastic system is not actually a meritocracy. You don't gain seniority or power by being a talented meditator or particularly wise. In the monastic system, you gain seniority simply by how long you've been ordained. you know. And I think that's a beautiful structure that the Buddha built in. It's like he built into the bureaucracy this thing that undercuts our tendency to um, to fixate on attainment and rank people by their level of attainment, and then generate a whole kind of hierarchy of value in that way, right? So you could be a successful monastic or a failure monastic, you know, and the Buddha knew that if that were how it was structured, you know, the celebrities would get more donations, and the dregs would not, you know. Um, and it's good that he made a structure to try to undo that, because in the real world, that happens all the time, right? People in misogynistic or patriarchal cultures tend to give a lot more donations to monks than nuns, for instance. You know, people do fixate on talented meditation teachers and charismatic leaders and give them a lot more donations. But the Buddha tried to set it up so that the thing that you have confidence in is not any specific individual, but is the system. And so just notice how these three jewels as objects of confidence, how they land as you hear the traditional definitions. And the reflection, coming out of this is really to sit with or inquire into a bit of how we discussed it in the discussion period. Like, what are these aspects of the Dhamma that you feel that you just have confidence in through whatever means that you've not yet experienced? And part of our intention and cultivation in deepening in the Dhamma is to, not just to become better meditators or more ethical, people in relationship and all the other things we do in practice, but is actually to become more confident, to find more and more confidence, to orient toward those teachings, those people, those peers, those communities that inspire confidence in the Triple Gem. Because from that confidence, practice becomes easier and easier. The stronger your confidence in the whole ecosystem of the Dhamma and where it can lead, um, the more you are supported in this relatively difficult undertaking to go against the stream of ordinary culture and find states that seem impossible but actually are not, and to find a kind of freedom that can seem impossible if you think about it too much or from the outside of the Dhamma, but that is actually possible, you know. And the more people you meet who clearly have tasted some of those states or insights, the more that confidence will grow, to your own benefit for a very long time, you know. And you might remember from our conversation on stream entry that one of the definitions of stream entry is that your confidence in the Triple Gem is strong. Just that is stream entry. So may we each attain the stream and find the jewels of practice arising in our own hearts, free from doubt, drawn forward on the path for the benefit of everyone, everywhere.